Hello and welcome to the Frontington and Backwoods Railway. Long-time viewers of this channel will know that there have always been two stations on this little fictional branch line. At the front of the layout is Frontington, so named because it's at the front. And at the back of the layout is Backwoods, so named because it's in the woods. No, really, there are trees. See? I painted them myself. But if I'm honest, it's not yet quite how I imagined it. The transition into the back scene is rather abrupt. So it's time to do something about that. These offcuts of foam should do nicely. Cut to shape, they'll fill the gap, and being modular, I'll be able to work on them away from the layout, so I'm not constantly leaning over the entire layout. I mean, honestly, whoever thought that putting the other side of the layout over there was a good idea? I found that one of the best ways of cutting extruded polystyrene is to use a steak knife. In fairness, this particular steak knife has never actually seen a morsel of cooked meat, so I suppose it should be really called a foam knife. Although it did take a chunk out of me while I was doing this, so maybe steak knife is appropriate after all. And in case you're wondering, yes, this is the remnants of the original Frontington and Backwoods layout. I'm recycling. Once the basic shape was cut, I decided to cover it in a layer of papier-mâché. Or, since I'm modelling in the English countryside, perhaps I should call it paper mache. Anyway, it's PVA glue and a couple of layers of newspaper, just to give it a slightly harder shell and potentially make it easier to paint. You could probably use a brush to spread the glue around, but I find fingers work just as well for this. Yep, those fit. So a coat of brown paint is next. Once that was dry, I added some more PVA glue and staticked some grass onto it. That's 2mm green, followed by 4mm brown. It's approximately more brown than green, on the basis that it's meant to be pretty overgrown and under a canopy of trees, so it shouldn't look like a nicely mown garden. Once that was all dry, I added some more glue, and this time sprinkled on some green fine turf from Woodland Scenics. It's essentially green foam chopped up really small, but it works really well as generic weeds and undergrowth. And these are not clouds, they're bushes. Or they will be. A gentle massage with watered down brown or black poster paint takes the white out of them nicely. And once teased out a little, it's ready for some glue. I used an old plastic bag to protect my hand. If you don't protect your hand like this, it's a nightmare to get the glue off. Ask me how I know. And then some more of that fine turf can be sprinkled on, ideally in a couple of shades of green for variation. The result is a pretty convincing unruly mass of bushes. Here's a little man for scale. Speaking of scale, someone commented on my previous video asking how long my layout is. Good question. The baseboard is 3,300mm long, give or take a millimetre here and there, and it's 1 metre deep. That's just under 11 feet long in old money. or about 250 metres at double O scale. There's about 16 metres worth of track in total, representing a fictional branch line that would have been about 3.5 miles long. If you're struggling to grasp the scale of these mixed measurements, that's okay, here's a banana. Not quite sure how that helps, to be honest, but there it is. To keep the trains from wandering off into the woods, I'm adding these fences. They're made by Pico, I think, again recycled from my previous layout, and they just clip together and push into the foam. Next, I'll need some trees. I'd like to tell you that this is my grandmother's secret recipe, but I'm not sure she ever cooked twigs. What I can tell you, though, is that 120 degrees Celsius for half an hour kills any bugs and bacteria that might be lurking inside. Some more of that polyfibre toy stuffing, some spray glue, and a liberal dusting of fine turf, and you've got yourself a fine-looking tree. I'm modelling midsummer, so it's absolutely fine that you can't see any branch detail. And since this tree is going to be at the back of the layout, it only needs to look good on one side, which makes things even easier. I'll need lots more of these in due course. Some I made myself using this same technique, others were little mass-produced trees, again from my previous layout, just to add some variation. I also made some using watered-down PVA in a spray bottle, and it works fine, it just takes a lot longer because you have to wait for the glue to dry. Now I can turn my attention to Backwoods Station itself. I've got these old plastic Hornby platform sections, which I'm proposing to recycle. They've already had a coat of paint from their previous life, so they're already less plasticky than usual, but I think there's still some life to breathe into them. For starters, I'm using some air-dry clay to fill the holes that I don't want, including trying to fill the gaps between the sections. Then I took it outside and gave it a blast of white primer. You might think that grey primer would have been more appropriate, and you'd be right, except that I didn't have any. So then I mixed up some paint. The precise colour I was aiming for was darkish, greyish, brownish grey, roughly. And I got it spot on, first try. So far I've been using this old Hornby shelter, but it's not quite what I want. Even with a better paint job, this wouldn't be at all accurate to what the Great Western Railway would have used. So I went online and ordered myself a 3D printed pagoda. The first job was to tidy up a few errant wisps of plastic that didn't quite get printed in the right place, but that was easy enough to do. The roof also had a bit of a wobble to it, but a quick rub with some sandpaper flattened the bottom nicely. Next, I got out my Phoenix Precision enamel paints and gave the whole thing a couple of coats inside and out, using a drop of isopropyl alcohol to thin it down slightly. Arguably not as good as proper enamel thinners, but I didn't have any of that, and IPA worked just fine. It was fiddly, particularly as I was trying to keep it all in camera at the time, but I'm pretty pleased with the result. The shelter will eventually go roughly in the middle of the platform, like this. But before we glue it into place, we have more work to do. For starters, this platform is far too clean for a mostly forgotten unmanned countryside halt, so I used some weathering powders on it. And the shelter got some weathering too. Then I added some more of that foam to make the land behind the platform. It was a similar story to the other section, so you can guess what's going on here. So there we have it. 3 modular sections of scenery. Backwoods Station really does look like it's nestled in the woods now. I'll need to make some more of these scenic sections to carry on around the rest of the layout, but they'll likely follow the same sort of approach as this. And there are plenty more bushes and trees to make for the rest of the layout too. But that's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching the process, in which case I'd really appreciate it if you could show your support by giving a like and/or subscribe down below. Thanks very much, bye for now.